Hello everyone, this is Lucio Daza, VP of Product Marketing here at Catalan, and today I have with me Rashad Nellams, VP of Cloud Operations and Professional Services, and also Alex Martins, VP of Strategy at Catalan. And this is the first episode of Test Talks. Again, as I mentioned, we have Rashad and we also have Alex here. We're going to have a conversation of the challenges that AI is bringing to testing in enterprise organizations and also how professional services will be the perfect solution to the implementation of these strategies and solutions in the enterprise. So before we begin, Rashad, how are you today?
Doing good.
Happy to have you here.
Bright and early in Vietnam.
Excellent. Yeah, beautiful Vietnam today, beautiful weather. Alex, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me here.
Happy to have you here. So, as I mentioned today, we're going to talk about all these challenges and all these layer of complexity that AI brings to testing, especially focused on enterprise organizations, which is a much different conversation that you would have if you're talking to, like, say, a smaller team, right? Alex, let's start the conversation with what is the status of testing. Not AI testing, but only testing in enterprise organizations as compared to how the conversation would be with a smaller team, which I believe would be different. So I imagine there's a different set of challenges. There's a different set of trends that we're observing right now in the enterprise. How is that looking these days?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting last couple of years because if you think about enterprise testing or testing in large organizations, the teams have always had to deal with monolithic applications, microservices application, or migrating to microservices architecture, and having to deal with mobile applications and BI and legacy systems that nobody really knows how they work anymore because people have left and retired. So you have this mix of different levels and different technology stacks that people, in this case, the testers on the team, have to find a way to test and make sure that the quality is at the level that the enterprise organization expects, and that obviously users will benefit from whatever is being given to them.
Yeah.
So that very diverse ecosystem is super complex in the enterprise companies. When you are thinking about the smaller companies or newer companies that don't have that to deal with all of that, all of those things that have been created over the years, the strategy that you have to apply for testing is really different. So we're seeing many of our customers today trying to navigate through that complexity, and now with the introduction of AI in the last couple of years, things have been just exploded in the sense of how do we do this, because now it's a whole new set of technologies that we need to learn that hopefully will help us at some point.
Well, of course. I mean, it's new and it should be feared, right? Yeah, and that's something we were talking earlier before. Like AI, absolutely is something brand new. Humans, we are by nature afraid of change, and when we talk about AI, we talk about. I mean, it has had multiple names in the past, machine learning, and of course AI, and all these things, and it brings a set of advantages, but also implementation, I think, is one of those things that makes people so nervous that they go like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, or maybe I should stick to the status quo, right? So, but in that case, Rashad, you working with professional services, have you noticed any trends without AI until this point of like, what are the things that we're seeing in testing in the enterprise industry and AI coming in? Are you seeing a different set of trends also of people like dealing with certain complexities and challenges?
Yeah, I think there's a few. So when you think about it, as you mentioned, people are still trying to figure out where to start.
Yeah.
Right. And so finding that start point, a lot of times you're having that failure to launch because we just can't figure out where's the entry. Where do we get on and where do we get off? What's too big? Obviously I kind of call it that conversation of you want to do something that creates value, but not enough to lose your job if you missed, mark. And so we have those type of conversations. But also too, as you talk about AI, it's one of those things now from a technology standpoint. Not only is it an integration point, but it's also a foundational point in some aspect, depending on where you're looking at it at.
Right.
And so that is a conversation too for many customers. They're thinking about how do we integrate it, but also where's it a foundation track for us as we want to expand in the future. And so from a professional services standpoint, helping them to see where to start. How do we take both the nibble and also the big bite, but do it in a progressive way that really leads to long-term value and success.
Right.
And that's part of what we're looking to do here at Catalan.
That's great. That's awesome. And yeah, there has to be a strategy, right? Like, I think one of the things that we want to make clear is that there is no, let's jump into the deep end immediately. And one of the things that I like to tell people, especially our customers, is that we are here to help you with that journey. Like, you're not alone. And we may be, you know, it will be our own fault sometimes, as maybe as customers we think, okay, this is too big for me, I don't know how to handle it. But thankfully there are solutions like that will help. So now that we established that baseline of where things are at today, I want to talk about the layer of complexity that AI brings to this whole scenario. And I imagine there's people out there saying, okay, does it get more complex than enterprise testing? Well, yes, it does. You know, is natural. So let's go over certain multiple points that I want to discuss today. The first one is, and you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, legacy systems. Mm-hmm. So enterprise organizations compared to small businesses, a small business is nimble, is newer. It has more modern technology. They're getting started, so while they're very young, at the same time they have the advantage of their systems are brand new. They just went out and got the latest and greatest, and so everything is more adaptable to testing. But then in large organizations, like you said, you have things that were created 10, 15 years ago that may not, you know, that person already moved on into something else, and documentation perhaps was not the best. Right. How do we deal with that these days with legacy systems and so all these complexities in the enterprise?
Yeah, there are many. In the past, there have been many approaches to trying and tackle that. Right? How do I make sure that my legacy applications are working as designed, and as changes happen to them, they continue working and don't break anything that was previously working. And now you think about the enterprise ecosystem, where those legacy applications are integrated with the more modern applications and back-end systems and all that. How do you test across those systems? It's a huge volume of data, yes. even bigger, number of test scenarios that are possible or that should be exercised as you integrate those applications. And coming up with all that purely based on the SME knowledge of the testing team is very daunting. I mean, it's really not something that has been successfully done in a consistent way, in a scalable way over the years. Yeah. So with that context, if you think about AI coming in now, where could it actually help
exactly.
a team that has been struggling with that for years and years? So AI is really good at crunching data, right? So if you feed data that in theory is of good quality, you hope that the output will also have reliable quality.
Right.
So from a testing team perspective, where the low-hanging fruit, if you will, for them to start getting a taste of what AI can do for them, is really look at the end point, which is, think about it as multiple applications that in the end they're feeding data to a screen that's used by the end user of that company.
Right.
So from that perspective, the user is looking at that screen, and obviously you're thinking, you as a testing team member, you're thinking, well, that screen has to work, has to enable the user to go through whatever scenarios they're trying to go through, and it really needs to deliver the value that they're expecting to receive from your company. So if that is the ultimate goal, AI is really good at looking at that very last point, that end user experience, and making sure that the end user experience is meeting that user's expectations, and comparing if that expectation is also matching the business expectation, which is documented, for example, in the requirements document or change documents from the organization, or Jira tickets, right, or user stories. It doesn't matter. But looking at it from an end user perspective, instead of looking at every single individual system, whether they are legacy or new, that sit in between, the business intention or the business goal and what the user is actually doing.
Right.
Because traditionally, that's what we've always struggled with is, hey, we have many systems in the chain that deliver a value to the user. Let's test every single hop to make sure that, we catch things as early as possible, so that it's, easier, faster, and cheaper to fix them, right?
Right.
Before they the symptoms show up in the next system and the next system, right? And that absolutely needs to be done. But in the enterprise context, it's very hard to do that. It's very complex. Teams have been trying to do that for years, and they can do it, but it gets very expensive very quickly. AI is enabling those teams now to don't start here in the middle, but start at the end, right? And then once they make sure that the experience from the user is being preserved release after release, then now they have a baseline. Okay, this is what it should be every single time we drop new code in the environment. So now that's good. Now let me go back now in each individual system and make sure that I apply the right testing strategies, let's say for a backend BI system or, a microservice, individual microservice, or your third-party application that you need to make a call and receive a result and then proceed. So there are, historically, we have always tried to make sure we start from those different systems to make sure that, like I said, from a testing perspective, I'm catching things as early as possible, but that's proven to be super hard. AI now is enabling you to start from the user and then go back and then make sure that now you have the time and resources and help to go through each individual system very methodically to make sure that you have that you ensure that you tackle the quality, that you ensure quality from both angles, both from an inside out perspective as well as from an outside in perspective.
That makes absolute sense. Thank you for sharing. Rashad, I as I'm listening to Alex, I cannot stop thinking of we're talking about AI, and I hate to call it another layer of complexity, but that really is something new. But I feel like AI and cloud are like two relative newer terms that, and I feel like they go hand to hand. And also it's almost like we talk about legacy and then we talk about all this new shiny cool stuff. And it's almost like talking about water and oil. In your daily operations with customers, what have you experienced in terms of helping them integrate AI, or what questions have you gotten? What are the things that they say that, hey, we have legacy systems, heavy stitched infrastructures here. I don't know that is for me. I don't think cloud will work. I don't know that AI may be the solution. Have you experienced something like that with?
Yeah, I think, to your point, I mean, we inherently, you're always trying to figure out, the perceive versus reality. So I think, obviously you come into some of those conversations and the customer says, well, we have this legacy system or we have this integration point. It's, so complex. But there's always a start point to how we configure that, how we take the initial steps to be able to get traction. And so helping a customer kind of, before they zoom so far in, helping them zoom out a little bit. And I think that kind of goes back to, Alex being able to have some kind of benchmark of what good looks like or what's the real objective, and then beginning to see what are our true dependencies in between. Because now once we have a good understanding of what we need to preserve or what we want to take place, now we can see, where the integration, where the configuration, maybe it is a little bit more involved here, but over here it's very simple and straightforward. And let's remove some of the mystery, but also let's remove some of the anxiety around that by having the right conversation, but also doing it in a prescriptive way. And I think, that's part of, when you have those conversations, whether it's talking about cloud, before it used to be the cloud native or which cloud transformation, having a prescriptive conversation about what are we trying to accomplish? What do we think really we're dependent upon? And then figuring out what that looks like collectively. That's kind of, where we come in both from professional services, but it's nothing more than just having a really good plan, right? It's having a plan 80% better than having no plan and just kind of going at it, because that typically, it's a demoralizing effort. And then we see customers pull back when really the plan was flawed, not the actual thing that you were trying to execute.
Yeah, and I imagine it's got to be a high percentage of the situations where people go like, I just don't know where to begin with. Like, it sounds complex. Again, it sounds new. It sounds different. I don't know that I have the time to learn it, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I want to jump into a topic that I know people want to know about, which is data privacy. So every time that we talk about cloud and then we talk about AI, And the question is always there. Like especially when you talk to an AI system, you're communicating with a computer somewhere. And then I've also heard that, the cloud is not the cloud, but is a computer somewhere that you're sending your information to. How do you handle that conversation when I say like, okay, yeah, that sounds perfect. I believe that it will make it faster, it will make it easier, but also it will poke a hole in my security fabric that I need to be extremely vigilant about. Like how do you handle that?
We've been discussing about that very point with our enterprise customers, because we've been putting out a lot of new capabilities in our products. So those conversations this year specifically have been very interesting from the standpoint that even our own customers, large organizations, they do not fully understand how to put the right policies in place in order to govern the data that AI should be consuming.
Or is it possible that they don't know which policies to implement?
That's it. That's exactly right. They do not know, because this is such a new space for them, right? Obviously, the pre-AI days or pre-Gen AI days, the data and security policies were very much known and very well defined, and everybody had to abide, But with AI coming in, if you just leverage the same policies, that basically means that AI won't work for them, right? Because they need to consume data. That we just need to be more careful with what to share with AI, right? Is this AI external to your company? Is that AI going to be using the data from your company to be trained on, and potentially the results of that training shared with other companies, potentially your competitors? Right. So literally late last year and this year is when our enterprise organization or customers have been discussing and been putting together the AI data committees within their own companies, right? As we were working with them and saying, hey, we have built this AI-powered feature that will make your life, much easier and will increase the productivity of your testing team by 95%, right? Based on results that we observed during, our alpha and beta programs last year. They were like, this is great, but we can't do that until our AI committee is fully sure of how to handle that.
And then what is the role of this AI committee in this case? It would be like oversee all the security regulations and make sure that everything is done to expectation?
Basically, when it comes down to making sure that the data that in the vendors' AI-powered solutions like Catalon and others, that the data that those vendors need to consume in order to deliver the value is not being used externally with our, for example, with our other customers, and with potentially third parties that we don't even know. So the AI committees are essentially writing those policies right now to tell us as vendors what you can and cannot do with the data. So it's not just about, hey, you have to protect PII data. Do you encrypt? Is it, in transit? Is it in like all the different possibilities of, how do we make sure that PII and any sensitive data is not being exposed or is very secure? It's not just about that. Now it's about, okay, I know it's secure, but in addition, you cannot share that data with anyone whatsoever, even if super highly secure.
Is it trained in the model? Is it and things like that? Yeah, I imagine that there's a lot of not only sharing with other organizations, but retaining it also with the system that is being shared with.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, it's their IP, right? Their intellectual property that is a competitive differentiator for them compared to their own competition. So it's been a very interesting last year, let's say almost a year, as we've been working with our enterprise customers, helping them put together those policies, because they themselves don't understand how vendors like us treat the data in order to feed large language models.
And that is fundamental. Like they don't know what they don't know. Exactly. So in this case, you're assisting them and like, okay, let me show you what are the possible questions that you're not asking, or what are the things that you're overlooking that we actually need to pay attention with.
Exactly.
So you mentioned something very interesting. I want to talk about the cloud, because you were talking about data in transit and security. And I imagine you get a lot of those questions that also, like, I mean, Because
when you say I get, personally, I don't get that direct question, but our CISO, our Chief Information Security Officer would.
Right.
And so to your point, we are answering questions like, where does the data sit? What does it look like in transit? What is the level of encryption? And we have to have, and I say the we in this collective, we as vendors, there are going to be times when you start talking about how we train our models, also what data, there is some expectations where customers, again, with these advisory boards, they have to be informed that there's a certain level of pruning of data that you should do before data comes to an outside vendor, regardless of it being opt-in or opt-out from a sharing and training standpoint. And so those are some of the kind of questions that we're going to answer on your behalf when it comes to a security questionnaire that we're getting, like, what are we doing with the data? And it kind of becomes a bi-directional conversation, right?
Absolutely.
Because we want to know a little bit more about the data you inherently are sending to us, so we can let you know a little bit more about maybe you should do that, maybe you shouldn't. And then also, here's the level of segmentation we can provide here at Catalan, or obviously it could be, a nondescript vendor as well. But that's some of the things that we get from a configuration, data residency, data security, governance, some of those kind of conversations.
So it's interesting because we talked about helping people understand what is the complexity, and now we were talking about a few minutes ago. We were talking about legacy systems and how is it that it will be possible to implement AI in those situations. Now you mentioned something along the lines of the AI and security compliance committees. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we have talked at least about like 3 different layers in this entire process, which brings me to the question that I've been wanting to ask, which is the length of the procurement process of something like this. I imagine you have seen an increase in time that it takes to get that done, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, and Alex can speak to this too. I mean, you're between the conversation around what our policies are, getting to a point where we can begin to look at even POCing this so we understand how it really works in practice, and then getting to a decision point. You're no longer in a 90-day cycle of conversation, right? You're well within a 6-month, 12-month at an enterprise level, right? As you mentioned, when you're in a smaller setup, you can fail fast. We can go try this. We can move on. We can even take a few hiccups just because of our customer base and their willingness to fail with us and understand and respond. But when you're at a large enterprise, the conversation is not the same because there's too much more at risk with their customers.
Right.
So they have to kind of mention whether it's a compliance conversation, whether it's an exposure conversation for the brand. They have to kind of, make sure they're dotting all those I's and crossing those T's. So it is going to be a longer process to prove the value, but also prove the security of the implementation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also from like our solution perspective, what we've been learning a lot, as we worked with our customers through that journey, is that it has taught us that whatever we put out in terms of AI power capabilities, it needs to have a flexible architecture. Because, for example, some enterprise customers, they may be comfortable with using a specific generative AI provider, with a certain LLM or large language model. And as long as that large language model is hosted in an enterprise cloud platform that they already subscribe to, right? So our solution needs to be able to integrate with that particular large language model. And then another enterprise company, they may restrict and really shut down any access to external large language models, and they are now implementing and piloting their own internally deployed large language model, which is extremely expensive. It's hard to do, requires a lot of expertise that they don't always have, and it's extremely hard to get in the market, right? That kind of expertise these days. So our solution needs to be able to integrate with that on-prem large language model that our enterprise customer is building. And then other companies, they may have something else, something hybrid. So what we've learned through that journey in the past year or so is that our architecture for integrating with AI from our products to the generative AI providers is to build it in such a way that regardless of the choice of our enterprise customers, we can work with any of them. Right. And that is a very hard engineering problem for a vendor like us to solve. And we've been able to do that, in the past few months, but only thanks to our enterprise customers that have been so eager to work with vendors like us to build it together, right?
Right.
Because it's not just us being flexible in terms of architecturing our solutions, but they themselves are going to have to put engineering effort on their side as they also bring up their own interfaces to their the enterprise large language model providers or their own on-prem deployed large language model. So it's a really, it's been an enriching experience, and it's made the relationships that we have with our enterprise customers much tighter from that perspective, and it helped, to Rashad's point, reduce that validation and evaluation cycles of our solutions. Still, it's much longer than the world before Gen AI.
Right.
But still, we are already seeing evidence of that timeline. The timeline is reducing as the customers become more comfortable. As us on our engineering side, we become more flexible.
Right.
So it's only getting better, but it's been a very interesting time.
So in a sense, you're reducing the friction that it takes to adopt these technologies, and then teams like yours can just say, hey, we have done this with multiple other users. Now we know the process. But definitely right now that's the beauty of that partnership with the customer, right? That they understand we want to help them, and at the same time you're learning from their feedback, they're implementing things, and they come back to you and say, hey, this is what we learned, and this is how, that flexibility part is fantastic. I mean, I cannot imagine a solution saying the only AI provider that you can use is this one because we don't connect with any other API in the market. So that would be a big no-no. So as we talk about that, one of the things that comes to mind is the scalability. So we talk about, and at the beginning I was mentioning small teams, and yes, they're growing, but scalability at that point may not be a concern for them. But enterprises, scalability has to be right there at the very top of their priorities, along with security and privacy and all these things. So in the world of AI, in testing, and as it relates to professional services and cloud, and how do we have the conversation of scalability? How do we address that concern? Or what are the concerns that you guys have seen with current customers or in the industry in general?
Yeah, in terms of scalability, it's always been challenging, right, to scale testing across any enterprise. Mostly because of the nature of those integrated systems that are a mix of legacy, modern technologies, and anything in between. But if you try to tackle all that all at once, it can be very daunting. And we've seen for years and years teams trying to do that and failing. And then they think, oh, it's the tools fault, the tool selection fault. So you need new tools. It's always like that.
Yeah.
But in reality, it comes down to people. That's always what it is. And one thing that vendors like ourselves, we have learned through the years, and especially now with AI, is that we can help make that adoption process of the different solutions much easier, or in other words, make that learning curve much smoother and easy to get into. So, and I know Rashad is doing a great job with our enterprise customers to help scaling that.
Tell me more about that, Rashad.
Sure. So, I mean, to Alex's point, we've kind of come up with both. So there's the conversation of how do we advise the customer to lay the right foundation.
Yeah.
So we have advisory services to make sure are we setting you up right to start with. But then we also have adoption services, and those adoption services are really kind of to help you get out of the chute fast, but also lay the groundwork for that scalability. So is the right training there? Is the right configuration there? Are the right targeted best practices being implemented from the start to really allow that customer to have a foundation that can spread throughout the organization?
Right.
And so from a professional services standpoint, we feel if you have the right advisory services and you have the right adoption services, that combination really positions the customer for success.
Absolutely. And that is what it should be about, right? Like making sure that they're able to get to the point of success that they're looking for. Or if they don't understand what point is, for us to let them know what are they capable of that they may not understand today.
Yeah.
So that's excellent.
And I feel like this is especially important for, and especially in the enterprise setting, of course, it's important for testing teams to understand that when it comes to adopting new technologies, and especially AI, right? Testing organizations have been notoriously, they've been slower in adopting and embracing AI technologies. And rightfully so. I mean, from a testing perspective, you have to be the most skeptical person in the room.
Absolutely.
You have to always question everything, always look at it, with that, you're always doubting everything.
Right.
Until proven, right?
Trust, but verify.
Yes, yes. So, and it's inherent of the profession, right? That's why, we chose to.
That's why you're a tester.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and because of that, the way you look at the AI adoption journey for testing organizations is different than, let's say, from an applications developer.
Yeah,
it's completely different. The mindset of those professionals works differently. One is trying to build, the other one is trying to make sure it's built right, in the right way. And if I can break it, it's fun. So in that context, the testing teams will always sort of be the last ones to adopt AI-powered technologies. And because of that, sometimes a lot of enterprise organizations have been missing out on the tremendous productivity improvements that have been well documented by now in the industry, even when it comes to testing. So I feel like, as Rashad was saying, professional services can help ease that fear or that skepticism, and essentially do a lot of that work, or show them how to do the work in the leveraging AI solutions, so that they start getting more comfortable, with how to work with them, with those technologies, looking at the results that are being achieved through that technology, and then they can do their validation, make sure that, okay, let me see if you can really convince me, and let's see if I would have done it better, and that, and all those things, and then eventually become comfortable and say, okay, now I think I'm ready to use it, and can you teach me how?
Let's talk about that for a moment, because one of the topics I wanted to touch on was change management. And I said it earlier, so AI is new, is different, and therefore it should be feared. So how in this case would you handle that? I mean, then again, enterprises, they may tell you, listen, we have been doing the way that we have been doing things for years, and it works. It's the way we do it. We don't need any change here. But in reality, the translation of that message is, we have heard that other people are implementing it, and our competition is beating us, but we are afraid of making the change. And it may be all the way from the individual contributor to the executive at the top. The individual contributor may be saying, I don't want to lose my job. AI is here to take it away. And then you have the VP and the executive saying, I'm afraid of touching what I have here because it may just break and crumble down to the bottom. So how do you handle that conversation, Rashad? Like, have you had any anecdotes that you can share with us, or any trends that you're noticing of people having this challenge?
So it's maybe a tag team for me and Alex, but at the same time, I think you're right. There are different roles in that conversation. Yeah. And so I think, when you're talking to someone who is, a part of the day-to-day testing operation, you're not coming at it from the perspective of, hey, we're looking, as you mentioned, this is not to get rid of your job, but this is to enhance your capability and flexibility in doing your job, right? And so showing them how that we can expand upon what they're able to do, because we can help them with better baselines. We can help them with greater visibility to what they've commonly done before, and it takes less time so they can get to that other part of the last mile that needs to be done. That's where AI helps them. That conversation is a lot easier, as Alex pointed out, when we start showing them, this is what it looks like, here's what it is in practice, here's some of the results. Now take a look and tell me, how would this be different if you had done it? Is it still 80 to 90% on the mark? And if it is, what is that other 10% that you would add? Well, just imagine if every day you only had to add that other 10%, how much better is the process getting now because of your expertise at that end? So now you have that conversation. On the other side of that, though, when you start talking about the executive, that's a different alignment, right? Because they're talking about strategic goals.
Right.
They're wanting to understand what is the true force multiplier of doing this.
Right.
And so now when you can show them, again, when we start talking about that end customer experience, how do you begin with the end in mind and show them this is how this is going to begin to create that 15% more revenue. This is how it's going to create that 15 to 20% better quality, or this is how it's going to get us speed to market this much more quicker because we're able to do these things. That conversation resonates different with them. And so now it's like, well, in order to do that, the enablement of AI is a part of that journey. Right. And so when we have those conversations that you mentioned, we're coming at it from different perspectives, but the value for both is still very present.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to Rashad's point, his team helped a very large banking financial services organization just a few months ago, right? Going through that process, which was really interesting to see, because as we were engaging with them to help them introduce automation, test automation into their ecosystem, cutting across legacy applications and more modern.
And I want to emphasize, you mentioned a financial company. So I mean, out of all of them, when we talk about complexity, security, legacy, privacy, everything, that must have been, I mean, off the charts.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible, because we were going in there to help them, essentially introduce test automation into their, DevOps lifecycle, cutting across legacy and modern technologies. And as we were doing that and delivering value, and they were achieving the goals that they had in mind to automate, their testing process, the conversation around AI was just starting at that bank, at a much bigger scope, of course. But then when the applications team started really being pulled into those conversations, everybody was like, oh my God, how do we test this thing, right? Because they were now being tasked, the applications development team was tasked to infuse AI into their applications, banking applications. And then obviously the testing team was like, how do we even test this? Because, just for context, in a world without AI, you have a requirement, the developer will write the code for that requirement, and then you know what to expect based on how that requirement was implemented. So you put something in, there's a business logic that processes the data, and then you know what you expect to get out, to come out the other way. If something else comes out the other way, then it's a defect, right? It's a very simple way to look at testing. But with AI, that does not happen. You simply do not understand or do not know what will come out the other side. And every time you put data in, even if it's the same data set, different output will be generated, right? I'm talking specifically about generative AI. So how do you even test that in a bank, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's crazy.
That's what I was saying. I mean, there must be a layer of don't touch any of this on all of it.
So basically, the testing team was raising their hands like, no, we can't test this. This is not possible. And the development team was like, well, but you gotta, because we're gonna code it. So obviously they were starting with a pilot. So it's not that they were doing that across all the applications and potentially breaking the experience of people trying to make deposits and apply for new products. But what came down to is that then professional services, Rashad's team was helping that testing team and the development team navigate through that new way of thinking about software quality in the context of AI. And really advising through the advisory services on here's how we should establish our first step in that testing the new age testing strategy, right? And then experiment with a few things based on our own experience, our own professional services team experience. That's been and that's the valuable thing there is to bring all the knowledge that the professional services team has from working with different customers, different environments, different industries. To help in this case, this bank figure things out in their, on their own environment, their own journey. How can they set themselves up for success? With that mission that came directly from, the bank leadership to say, you have to figure out a way to infuse AI into our products, because we know, we're seeing in the industry, there are tremendous benefits to be achieved both internally in terms of productivity, cost savings, and speed to market, but also in the end user experience. Our customers can receive value much faster in a much more seamless way, in which will, in turn, improve the bank's positioning in the market. So it's been a very interesting journey, not just from building products like we do, but also, working with Rashad's team as he helps our enterprise customers navigate through this new world of generative AI.
Tell me a little bit more about that, Rashad. How do you, if you can give me the 2-3 minute rundown of how that entire process went, a couple of hiccups that you may have hit in the road, or things that they they didn't know or they didn't foresee that you help them go over and the success? How did it look at the end?
Well, I was going to pivot, but I'll go back to that a little bit. So, I mean, and I'm speaking on behalf of someone on our team who helped with that. But to your point, you know, we had a conversation there with helping them to figure out how they really derive the value. And some of the things that they were encountering is, again, we talked about it. The change agent is different in testing. And so now how do we level up our understanding of how this works now differently from what we've done in the past from a practices standpoint? And so helping them to really map out, how do I get better usage out of the tools? So when I apply the knowledge to our tools, our products that we're selling to our customers, we can be way more introspective in regards to the tests that we're doing to increase the quality.
Yeah.
And so that was a big one for them. It's just understanding the training gap. And I think we say that, and it's really not the smallest thing in the conversation. Is there is a skills gap sometime in regards to now what's available to the tester to really make their job easier and make them more effective. And that was one of the big conversations that we had there. And I was thinking about, as Alex was kind of speaking before, we are now, even as a professional services organization, we're being pulled in some different directions. When we talk to customers, we want to talk about how we help you find the right level of adoption, build the right foundations. But at the same time, customers are really beginning to look at, how do we build a testing center of excellence? And that's a word that we maybe heard thrown around at times, but it's coming back around to your overall approach. And when we talk about AI, now AI is being included as a pillar to how they build that center of excellence. And so now they're looking at us and saying, hey, how do we inject that in here so that it's something that, again, is foundational to how we approach testing, foundational to how we do automation in testing as well, and expand our reach. And so that's something that we're being, asked from both the individual contributor all the way up to the C-suite. How do we make that happen and make it so that we can scale it, as you mentioned earlier, over time? And so that's something new for us, but at the same time, the things that we've learned in this journey with helping customers has given us a lot of insight to how to do that from our, obviously a little bias from our perspective and our experiences. How do you do that with the right level of, this is what we know now, this is what you're able to do right now, but also giving room for that to expand over time.
Absolutely. So Rashad and Alex, we are talking about this new layer of complexity that is being added or is being requested to enterprise customers to adopt, pretty much. So we talk about privacy, we talk about integration with existing pipelines, we're talking about integration with infrastructures, which may be complex because of how well it did age or not, whatever investments they have done. We're talking about skill sets that you also have to have in your organization. So my point is that there is a lot that we're covering here, but ultimately, what is the return of investment that we are expected a customer get from a process like this? What does success look like once an enterprise customer say, okay, I want to go AI, I want to implement this, and I'm okay with whatever challenges or what they may consider challenges would be? What does success look like for them?
So success looks like when organizations are really leveraging AI in order to essentially increase productivity, so make their existing testing teams much more productive, doing a lot more things in the same amount of time, or doing things faster, because typically testing has always been sort of the bottleneck, right, in the software development lifecycle. And so generative AI in testing is enabling that to be achieved. Or you are able to achieve cost reduction, right? If that's the goal of the organization, you can reduce the cost, be it on staff or with tooling or with infrastructure. You can achieve that type of ROI. But ultimately what it comes down is really understanding the use cases that you are applying AI to. And as you're doing that, you're measuring the value that's being achieved in let's say, the productivity increase.
Right.
What we've seen in the industry, and that's kind of causing a lot of skepticism or increasing the skepticism, is that if you hear from different vendors around what you can achieve with generative AI, there's really not a lot of use cases or data other than test automation code generation, right? So generating automation code straight from a manual test case or directly from requirements, which is not a testing specific use case. It's a developer use case, right? It's essentially generating code. It's code generation. And in that context, yes, it's proven. Gen AI has proven to deliver incredible value there in terms of cost, effort reduction or productivity increase, and even cost reduction. So, but if we think about use cases specific to testing, we don't hear a lot of hard data, right, or hard metrics that state this team adopted generative AI technologies for testing, and they have been able to reduce this or increase that. Like, you don't hear a lot of that. What we have seen, answering your question about what success looks like, we have seen here at Catalan, working with our enterprise customers, productivity increase of upwards of 82% in the past 8 months that we've released generative AI powered solutions.
So we're not talking about just a 25% increase or 5% increase. You're saying 80% increase in performance or productivity.
Exactly. So think of it as, hey, the team has been doing testing the same way they've always been doing. And now they are piloting, Catalan, different Catalan AI-powered features. And as part of that pilot, they've been able to showcase to their leadership that level of productivity.
So let's dive into that for a little bit, because AI has been the word of the last 2 years. I mean, it's almost becoming a bad word in certain spaces because everything is AI these days.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of hype. There is probably a little bit of reality,
right?
Or at least that is the how it's being stigmatized out there. So tell us what is real, what is happening, what are we doing, what are we seeing in the industry to really conceptualize or materialize actually what is tangible,
right?
And with AI these days.
Yeah. So I would like to think, or I like to think about that from two perspectives. One is the experiments that have been done with smaller companies, right? Smaller organizations. Where you're now generating tests from requirements, and you're generating automated tests from requirements or even manual tests. That brings a certain level of benefits, right? And the reason I say that is because in those smaller settings, it's easier for the team to essentially apply AI and then see the results and then compare that to what they were doing before. Like, it's a small team, right? Or it's maybe, one person team.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to make that determination. Did it really help or not, right? So it used to take me 5 hours to create a manual test or automate a test. And now with generative AI, I can do that in, 30 minutes. And it's not just good enough, it's actually good.
Right.
Like, it's the way I would have done after 5 hours, right? And then in the enterprise context, it's different because you have multiple teams, multiple different types of professionals with different background, onshore, offshore.
Right.
You're dealing with legacy applications, and then CRMs and ERPs and all that. So in that enterprise context, we haven't seeing that same level of easy. It's not been that easy to measure the benefits, right? But still, we see a lot of buzz from even testing industry leaders that announce, hey, the AI is enabling us to do this, is enabling to do that, which is true, but applying that to the enterprise organization is not generating the same level of benefits that we see already in smaller companies. So we need to be a little careful, and that has contributed to the skepticism in the enterprise space, because it's like, okay, I see that this works, and I can see the video, right? I can see the metrics, but it doesn't work for my organization. Like, the complexity of that thing you demonstrated is incredibly smaller than what I have here.
How do you get over that?
So we need to think about AI solutions, and more specifically use cases that do not have yet to deal with the complexities of of those multiple legacy systems in the middle. Because like I said, it's instead of taking a huge bite at that problem, you start little by little, where you can effectively start making a difference iteratively, right?
Yeah.
So a clear example to you, right, to really get into the practical side of it, we have been working with our enterprise customers to, instead of having to deal with those complexities, let's just look at how are your users or your end users navigating through your application, right? And in a common use case for us is that a lot of our enterprise customers, because they have those legacy systems, they do not have the time or the staff to make sure that those applications continue working after every release. We are applying AI to understand how the users, the end users, actually interact with the application in order to achieve the value they're looking for. So let's say I'm trying to book a flight, I'm trying to transfer money, right? Or I'm trying to buy a product. We understand how those users interact with the application, and we use generative AI to help us basically say, hey, here are all the tests that you need to run as part of your release cycle right now,
Right.
to make sure that this new release is not going to break that user experience, right? So if, let's say, the user is able to transfer money, apply for credit card, book a flight, right, buy a product, we want to make sure that those same user flows continue working in your new release as you are working in that new release. So before you actually put that release to the hands of the users, you will know if those user flows will break. Right. If they will break, you as an organization have now all the data that you need to say, oh no, we cannot break the user experience.
Right.
We have to fix it now. And if we can't fix it fast enough, we have to stop the release or delay the release. Because otherwise, people are going to stop, being able to transfer money.
Yeah, you don't want an unhappy customer
Yeah.
or a subpar user experience.
Yeah.
So you're not only, and pardon the interruption, but you're not only providing a way for them to eliminate the guesswork, but on top of that, you're providing also data for them to make a data-driven decision on what are the things that need to be tested, rather than guessing what's going to happen.
That's exactly right. And that is a very hard use case to tackle if you think about it, right? Because we know that in the enterprise, because of complexity, the regression testing side of the business, right, of testing is very hard to not just create regression tests, but maintain those regression tests over time. And usually it's a never-ending battle. You're always adding tests to your regression suite to a point where the regression suite becomes so huge that you're spending now 90%, 95% of the time of the team on maintaining or updating that regression suite instead of spending that time testing the new features that the business wants to put in the hands of the users, right? So what happens in reality is the team decides, well, let's do risk-based testing, let's prioritize. So they start decreasing the amount of regression tests they're doing in order to have time to test the new features.
Yeah.
So what we find very commonly across our enterprise customers is that those regression testing, the regression testing process is full of holes, right? And defects escape and all that. So eventually we see teams that pretty much say, okay, we're not going to do a formal regression testing cycle. We're going to focus on doing proper new feature testing. And then just before release, we're just going to do a round of exploratory testing very quickly to make sure things continue working, right? So with applying Gen AI to that use case, like I mentioned earlier, you're now basically saying, hey, don't worry about regression test at first, right? Focus on new feature testing, because there is a solution that's powered by AI that will give you the regression tests that matter to your users, real users. Make sure they continue to do what they need to do. And then as you finish your new feature testing, you now can and should start doing additional regression tests that are maybe you don't expect users to do a certain scenario, but they have to be tested, right? We're not saying should not do regression testing. We're just saying focus now on new feature testing. Make sure that while Gen AI makes sure that the user flows from production continue working your new release, and then the time that you have left, now you complement your regression tests with scenarios that maybe don't really impact end users, right? So it's really a comprehensive approach to regression testing that includes both user-based regression tests as well as requirements and change-based regression testing. So that's a real use case that we have seen in our users achieve, our Catalan users achieve those productivity improvements upwards of 80% in their day-to-day. That's real, as opposed to those many kind of ancillary Gen AI use cases that are great and sound great for small companies, but that are really not applicable or scalable to the enterprise.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alex, thank you so much for all those insights. Rashad, thank you so much as well. We are going to start wrapping it up. We're coming up on time, but before we do so, any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think you've heard us kind of speak about Catalan Professional Services and what we're able to offer, but our point is still the same. We're not a dependency to you being successful, but we are here to help. And so whether it's our advisory services, whether it's adoption, whether it's appropriate training or deployment, if you need the help, we're more than happy to show you where to start and how to be successful for the long run.
Excellent. Alex?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here. I mean, it's really great to be here at Catalan HQ and having fun with you guys. Yeah. And to our audience, I really want to thank you for your time and want to say once again, I mean, generative AI specifically is here to stay. I know we are always skeptical because we're testers and that's what we do. However, there are different use cases that you can leverage AI today and obtain tremendous benefits. We've seen that, we've done that. Rashad's team has helped us educate a lot of our customers in that process throughout that journey. So don't feel like you need to do all that by yourself because I know it's daunting, it's especially in the enterprise context. So we're here to help you with solutions and with professional services, so count on us.
Excellent, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here with us today. Again, this is Test Talks with Catalan. Stay tuned for more and see you later. Bye-bye.